In part 1, I described what fields online, field signals are, and what iPaaS is, and also what are ad hoc citizen integrators. In part 2, I'm going to show you the fields online, the user interface, and how to do the simplest possible integration. Let's have a look at the field signal or fields online user interface. Let me just minimize this. You can see in here that, the field signal user interface, you have several tabs on the left-hand side. Home, integration, connections, customization, and setting. Now, let's start from the settings. If you're going to use Salesforce or Twitter, you need to register your application here. As you all know, when you want to integrate with Salesforce, you need to sign up as a Salesforce developer and create an application there. The same applies for Twitter. Once you register with Salesforce or Twitter and create your application there, you'll be given a client ID and client secret. They are equivalent to user ID and password. You have to enter that information in here before you can actually configure the connectors. Now let's look at the customization. Remember last time, that is in part 1, we talked about since you only have 13 connectors out of the box and only 4 processing steps, how do we extend it? Well, you can extend it by writing your own extensions, or you can download the extensions from the upstream project, the community project, which is a synthesis, and you come here in the customization, click on extensions, and then import your extensions from there. Now, before you can do any integration, you need to make the connectors or configure the connections. In here, I've already configured physical product service, which is accessing an API exposed by physical API management. I've already defined the Salesforce and FTP connector. So if you look at the physical product service, you can see that is a URL to access the API. Now let's look at how we can do the simplest possible integration. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the physical exposed API to retrieve a JSON file. And then right away, I'm going to FTP that JSON file to an FTP site. So this is how you're going to do it using iPaaS or Red Hat Fields Online. Click on Create Integration, and then you select the connector you already configured. In this case, the physical product service. And there is only one operation for that particular connector, which is periodic invoke URL. So I selected that. I need to give it the path, which completes the URL to access that particular physical exposed API, including all these keys, etc., to authorization key in the URL. And the HTTP method is get. And I wanted to retrieve this every 15 seconds. Click on Next. Click on Done. Now I have created one connection endpoint, which is this physical service. Now I have to create the FTP connection. I just click on this one, and again, there's only one operation, upload. I specify the file name for the FTP, and also specify the htdocs as the FTP directory. And then I also specify that if the file exists, I just want to override it. Next. Done. Now, this is all that I need to do to actually create this integration. As I said, this is the simplest integration that one can do. right? And then I can add a name to it, like fee scale to FTP, for example. And then next thing I can do is just click on the publish, and then I can actually start seeing the results. That is, every 15 seconds, the integration will retrieve the JSON file and FTP it to the FTP site that has been configured. If there are Apache Camel developers here, you probably look at it and say, what's so interesting about this? I can do that in a few lines of code. Yes, possibly you can do that. But again, if you're looking at why we are providing the iPaaS, it's not for all these like specialist developers. It's for the citizen integrators. Now, let's have a look at what you actually need to do that in order for you to actually create, for example, Apache Camel or JBoss Views integration application. Right, let me get back to my presentation. Now, let us see what does it take to actually create such an application, right? First of all, of course, you need to set up an IDE, right? In this case, it's Developer Studio. And then you need to create a Views project. Then you need to create the integration or camel route. And then you need to test it, and then you have to deploy it onto OpenShift. Now, for a citizen developer whose day job is not the developer, right? So if you ask him to actually install IDE, he or she may have a problem, right? Even after he or she has actually installed Developer Studio, it may take some time for him or her to actually learn how to use Developer Studio. And then the next thing is that you need to create a Views project, right? Developers will say, oh, it's simple. I can easily use Maven archetype to create a Views project. But that is for specialist developers. All these citizen developers, they may not know that much about Maven or Maven archetype, etc. So that is another issue here. And then after that, after you created a project, you still need to create the application itself. With Apache Camel, you have so many options, you have so many components. Like for example, you can use Java DSL, you can use Blueprint, you can use Spring Boot, and there are like 200 plus components or endpoint factories out of the box. So it's very difficult for a developer. And then you have to test it, and then finally you have to deploy it, right? Even a seasoned Views or Apache Camel developer may have problem deploying to OpenShift if he or she is not familiar with OpenShift itself. So you can see that in order to do a simple thing there, you need to have lots of skills. And iPaaS solve that problem for the citizen developer, who may not have that kind of skill. Now let's look at, if you're even a developer, you still need to watch out for things like this. For example, in here, the endpoint is FTP site. So this is one way to actually configure the FTP endpoint, right? Of course, the username and password can be hidden, but in here, to make it simple, I just include that in the XML itself. So if you look at this one here, this endpoint URI, so can anybody detect any issue with it? So it's specifying that FTP is the Camel component I'm going to use. And this is a path, and this is my username and password. Just give you another second. Okay, so let's see whether you can get all this, right? The first thing is, in here, the URI only specifies the path where you're going to put the file in. It does not actually specify what the file name is. If you're going to use this endpoint URI, so what happens is Apache Camel will just assign a generated file name and then save it onto this particular directory that you specify. The other problem with this particular URI is that, it may work, it may not work, and the worst case is it may work during testing and may not work during production. Why is that the case? If you're familiar with FTP protocol, you know that an FTP actually consists of two TCP sessions, right? When the client will initiate the a command TCP session, which is for sending of commands to the server, and depending on which mode you use, if you're going to use the active mode, then the server is going to create that TCP connection back to the client and then use that to send the information or do the file transfer, right? This is called active mode, right? There's another mode where the client initiates and creates both TCP connections, right? Both command and data. Well, if you use this particular URI, the default is actually active mode. That means the server is responsible for creating the TCP connection back to the client. So what problem can this cause? Say if you have a firewall and you haven't actually opened the FTP port, that means the server will never be able to actually create a TCP connection back to the client. If you're using passive mode, then it will always work. So the solution is you need to specify passive mode equals true. Now you can see that, well, these are some fine points that even like developers who are not familiar with FTP may have a problem with. Like imagine how can a citizen developer or integrator know all of this, right? This is the simplest integration that one can do with the Fuse Online. And in the part 3, I'm going to show you a much more complex integration involving Twitter and Salesforce, and it will involve filters and also data mappers. Thank you.